Gritty determination was always painted on his face. His intense competitive spirit drove him to greatness seldom seen in sport, while his personal tales of survival have made him a legend. No champion has been as strong-willed. Join us as NASCAR Past Champions takes a look at three-time title holder Cale Yarborough.
Raised just down the road from Darlington Raceway, Cale Yarborough never knew how to not live right out on the edge. Hi everyone, I'm Mike Joy. Who else do you know that taught himself how to fly an airplane? Cale played semi-pro football as a teenager, but from the moment he snuck through a hole in the fence of the famed Speedway, he was fascinated with driving a race car. By age 17, Yarborough had been tearing up the short tracks and yearned to try his skills on a super speedway. Well, where else but his home track that had long captivated him? Darlington. It was a storybook in the making, but didn't turn out as planned.
I was ready for the big time, so I had some friends that went around the country and went around the community raising money and bought a brand new 57 Pontiac and turned it into a race car and put me in the Southern 500 in Darlington. Well, I got my NASCAR license, but by the time race day came, some way the NASCAR officials found out that I was only 17 years old. They told me I couldn't drive the car, but I slipped in it anyway, and Johnny Bruno was the chief steward then, and when the race started, he saw I was out there, and so he black flagged me and brought me in. He says, "You're just too young," says, "you can't drive that race car." But that didn't stop me. I beat Johnny back to the pits, I think, and so we finally had some mechanical problems.
It was a rude awakening for Cale attempting to drive in his first Southern 500, but he was determined to make it. After supporting his family with various odd jobs, Cale would move to the sports hotbed of Charlotte to try and capitalize on any opportunities.
Cutting pulpwood and got into the turkey business, and then of course Betty Jo and I got married, and I was playing semi-pro football and just anything I could do to make a living, and racing too. And wasn't long after that before Ford came along, you know, and showed some interest, and then I moved to Charlotte, and so I could be close to it. Went to work for Holman & Moody, $1.25 an hour, sweeping the floor at the Holman & Moody shop, so I could be there if something happened, just like I had done at the racetracks. Put me in, here I am, you know, and it paid off.
Soon after, Cale got a chance to drive full-time.
When I was working at the shop up at Holman & Moody's, they put together a team for me up there, old Red Myler. You remember Red Myler? Red was my chief mechanic, and we were kind of a learning team or R&D team, and that's when we ran 50-some-odd races that year. And then I went to banjo.
By June 1965, at age 24, Cale would reach Victory Lane at Valdosta, Georgia, a sign of things to come. Driving for Banjo Matthews, Cale's daredevil bravado would come in handy in 1965 when he provided fans at the Southern 500 with what has become a thrilling moment in the history of that great race.
Sam McQuagg and I were racing for the lead, and we got touched a little bit going in turn one, and it just got airborne, went completely out of the racetrack. Quite a ride. And it didn't even touch the guardrail. It went over the guardrail, you know, and what is it, 4 or 5 stories, 5 stories down, 8 stories down on the other side of that wall. Boy, I knew when that thing hit, it was going to hit hard. And it did, but thank goodness I came out of it all right.
Cale was okay and just crawled back under the fence. By 1966, Cale had hooked up with Stuart, Virginia's famed Wood Brothers. Together, in 5 years, they would win 13 races.
He was flat out from the start, and he'd do as much when he started as he ever did. He wasn't the kind that would lay back or anything. He just wasn't that type of driver.
He was driving it as hard, over the limit mostly all the time. I can remember the time he won Daytona in '68, He come in and the ignition, we just started using electronic ignition. We had two in it, and he came in and quit, and I crawled in the window and changed the ignition. He says, man, says, you got to fix this thing. Says, it'll fly. And I remember he went on and won the race.
As Cale made his name in the sport, pictures showed a doggedly determined and focused young man who always had his game face on.
You know, so some of the pictures you're talking about is when I just got out of a race car and I'm tired and dirty and greasy. But right, game face. I was just thinking, you know, how many boxers do you see smiling when they're out there fighting? You know, they're there for business, and I was there for business too. And that's wasn't much smiling going on when I was behind the wheel.
In 1970, Cale would leave the Wood brothers, but not by choice.
Won a lot of races with the Wood brothers and really enjoyed that 5 years with them, and ran with them until Ford pulled out of the racing business. And at that time, I didn't know what I was going to do, you know, and I wanted to stay involved in racing, and that's when I went to the Indianapolis cars for a couple of years. I drove Indianapolis in '66 and '67, and then '70 and '71. It was a good experience. I enjoyed it. You know, they're a race car just like any other race car. You just drive them a little bit different, but still love the stock cars the best.
Cale's love of stock cars would bring him back to NASCAR, where his impact would be strongly felt over the next decade. When Cale decided to come back to NASCAR racing, he came back in a big way, teaming up with a legend, Junior Johnson.
Everything just went perfect for us. We just hit it off good, got along together good. Junior had good equipment, and I was hungry to get back into Winston Cup and win races, and we did.
When he first came to me, Cale was in bad financial trouble. Drove his heart out for you because he needed to make money, and he, I think, learned from trying to get on his feet with himself how hard he needed to compete to be the person in racing he wanted to be. And as time went along, I don't think you could have beat him in no way, shape, form, or fashion on certain days, because he had the determination and the willpower to move a mountain if he had to.
Junior and Cale would spend 8 years together, forging fierce Sunday battles with rivals Richard Petty, Bobby Allison, Buddy Baker, and David Pearson.
He was tough. I mean, he was one of the few that it didn't make no difference if he was 10 laps ahead or 10 laps behind. He drove that car just as hard as he could drive it. And if it had 3 wheels or 4 wheels or 2 wheels, all he was trying to do was get ahead of the guy in front of him.
Cale was probably so tough, sometimes he beat himself. You know, he was a determined driver, you know. You wasn't going to physically outdo him.
Chasing their first championship, they came close in 1973 when Benny Parsons won the crown, and in 1974 losing to Petty.
I think he sat on pole 15 times that year. I mean, he was really, really good. And we just wound up having just a little bit better year as far as for the championship. He had just started driving for Junior, and they were just sort of getting their stuff together. And you know, 2 or 3 years after that now, you know, he won three championships in a row, but it took them a year or two to really get jailed, and once they got jailed, man, they was tough.
I guess it doesn't matter if you lose by 1 point or 1,000 points, you've lost. I had hoped that we could win that championship, and we ran hard for it, and but it just happened that we came up a little bit short, and we had to go after it again, and we never gave up on winning the championships, but I'd love to have won that one because we had a good shot at it.
By 1976, Cale and Junior hit their stride, putting together 9 wins and 22 top 5s to clinch the crown by 195 points, finally beating the king.
They had won so many of them, and you basically, if you raced with them over the years, it was kind of expected of them to win the championship, but it wasn't a rival of me to beat the Petties. It was just something that I decided I'd go after. And when I went after it, I put a lot of effort into making sure we got it.
Well, it was absolutely fantastic. You know, it's something that I wanted all my life, is to be the best in the business. You know, and when you win the championship, that's what that means. That particular year, you were better than everybody else. And, it was a dream come true for me. It's something that I had always wanted.
Cale and Junior were finally champions, but they had only just begun to write their own chapter in NASCAR history. After finally winning the Winston Cup in 1976, Cale didn't let up. He won 9 times the next year en route to his second championship. And the following year was little different. 10 wins and a three-peat. Cale and Junior became the first team to win 3 Winston Cups in a row, a feat that has not been repeated since.
When we won 3 in a row, it was a good accomplishment, but I had no idea that it would still be a record. You know, when you got people like that have won championships like Richard Petty and Dale Earnhardt and Jeff Gordon and Darrell Waltrip, you would think that somewhere along the line, as many as that they won, somebody would have won 3 in a row. So it's just amazing to me that record still stands. It won't stand forever. Sooner or later, somebody will. But so far, it's been a pretty good record.
Speed Weeks the following year produced the race that put NASCAR on the national map, the '79 Daytona 500. It was the first live flag-to-flag TV coverage, and the last lap came down to Cale and Donnie Allison for the win. When it was over, Richard Petty took the checkered flag, and Cale was taking on both Allison brothers in the infield in a fistfight that had all America talking.
I had Donnie set up just like I wanted him for that last lap slingshot, and when I came down to go by him, he came down too, and finally got me off in the dirt at 200 miles an hour, and I had no control over the car, and it came back on the racetrack and tangled us both up, put us both in the wall, and there Richard was a half a lap back and went on to victory lane.
Cale got out of his car, and we had a few unpleasant words for one another. And Bobby pulls up on the racetrack apron and says, was I all right? He asked me, was I all right? I said, sure, I'm fine. He said, you want to ride back to the garage? I said, no, I'm going to stay here with the car. Well, all this time, Cale's walking over to Bobby's car, and naturally, I just follow on behind. And I couldn't hear what he said. I knew that he said something to Bobby, but I saw him punch Bobby, you know, through the window. Well, I grabbed Cale by the arm and spun him around and said, you know, if you want to fight, I'm the cat you need to be fighting with.
I was getting ready to leave, and Cale started yelling that it was my fault that the wreck happened. And I think I questioned his ancestry. I was sitting in my car. I had the window net down, but I still had the seat belts on, still had my helmet on. And he hit me in the face with his helmet, not his fist. He had his helmet in his hand. He hit me in the face with his helmet. And it stunned me. It surprised me. I didn't expect him to do anything like that. And I looked, and a couple of drops of blood hit down in my lap, and I said, I got to get out of this car and handle this right now or run from Cale the rest of my life. So I climbed out of the car. With that, Cale went to beating on my fist with his nose.
There wasn't a fist fight. There was a little shoving match. Should have been a fist fight. But, you know, those things happen in the world of sports. Donnie Allison is one of my best friends. Bobby Allison is one of my best friends. Those things happen. It happened that day, but we've been friends ever since.
Cale and Junior stayed together 2 more years, winning 10 races, finishing 4th and 2nd in the championship. But by 1980, Cale's focus had mostly changed to his business interests and family. With all the commitments tugging him in different directions, Cale made a tough decision.
One day I had a business meeting. I was going to my airplane, and I had on my suit and tie and my briefcase, and I walked out the back door, and my kids were sitting on the back steps, and I said, what are you kids doing just sitting around? And BJ, my youngest daughter at the time, I said, why aren't you riding your bicycles or doing something? She said, Daddy, our bicycles are broke. I said, well, why didn't you tell me they were broke so I could fix them? She said, Daddy, we told you and told you and told you. You just didn't hear us. So went back in the house, took off my suit, put my briefcase down, and called the people that I had a very important meeting, told them something more important had come up. I made the decision that day.
With nothing left to prove, Cale may have reduced his racing schedule, but he wasn't through making history. Cale backed his racing down to a limited schedule, driving for MC Anderson for 2 years, and headed to Daytona in '83 with the Harry Ranier team. Teamed up with horsepower guru Waddell Wilson, Cale was poised to make history again. He and Wilson found the power to qualify at over 200 miles per hour on their first lap. But the record wasn't meant to be his that year because lap 2 ended in disaster.
We thought we had a good shot at being the first team to qualify over 200 miles an hour at Daytona. And we'd practiced good, and Waddell had set up a tremendous race car for us, and things were just going well. And I'll have to take some of the blame for what happened. I walked by the back of that thing, and I was thinking about that 200 mile an hour lap, so I beat that spoiler down just a little bit more. And had I not done that, we'd have probably been in pretty good shape. But the first lap was a good lap, but it was a hairy lap. I knew that I was on the ragged edge.
The first lap around, he ran like a 44.70, and I was tickled to death. Because that, was over 200 miles an hour. So the guys up in the tower was checking the intervals around the racetrack, and they said when he went down the backstretch, they were jumping up and down hollering because he broke 200 now at Daytona. And they said, one guy that was timing the car said, well, you think that's something? Said, if he makes around this time, it's going to be close to 203 miles an hour. But then when he hit the corner going down to 1 or going into 3, he hit the flat of the racetrack, and it de-wedged the race car, and it come around on him. I felt it getting light, but I still didn't back out. I probably should have, but I figured it would settle back down, but it didn't, and it went up in the air and flipped over and skidded into the wall and slid down to the grass. But the first one was a good one, but that second one would have been a better one, and just wish we could have made it. He said, well, you done everything right but one thing. I said, dang, what did I do wrong? Cale said, we didn't put the controls in so I could fly.
Remarkably, Cale would come back on race day and win the 500 in a backup car. 1 year later, he and the Ranier team qualified at over 200 miles an hour and dominated the 500 again. Ironically, Daytona handed Cale what he counts as his worst loss that July, as Richard Petty scored his 200th career victory.
I had him set up right exactly where I wanted him, waiting for that final lap, slingshot him to the finish there, and the caution flag came out with 3 laps to go, and I wasn't exactly where I needed to be when the caution came out, but I knew I had to make a shot at him then. I was too close to him. I needed to get a longer run at him to make it work, which I would have done on the last lap. And but when the caution flag came out, I said, this thing's gonna finish on the caution. I gotta go now. I don't have time to set him up like I would have if it was 2 laps later. And so I made a run at him and got by him down the backstretch, but didn't have enough momentum to stay in front of him, till we got to the start-finish line. He beat me just a foot. And the bad thing about that was I knew whoever got back to the start-finish line was the winner of the race. Well, my brain jumped out of gear. There was 2 laps left, see? So the next lap, thinking, well, he beat me, the race is over. I came down pit road and still had a lap to go. Went from 2nd to 4th, I think.
In 1989, after 31 years and 83 wins, Cale took off his driving gloves for good. He would try his hand at car owner until 1999. But after managing only one victory, he left the sport to nurture his business empire.
You have to have a lot of respect for Cale, because every time he drove that race car, he drove it as hard as his little short body would let him drive it. But he did a fantastic job of driving the car. You don't win the championships he won and win what he won without being able to do that.
Cale Yarborough, along with Earnhardt, Cale was probably the toughest individual ever to drive a Winston Cup stock car. He just abhorred the thought of losing. Down through the years, there are very, very few drivers could take a bad car and win. A good driver could take a bad car and win. There were very few of those. Cale Yarborough probably stands at the top of the list of drivers who could take a bad car and win.
I liked him a lot outside the race car. I hated him on race day. I mean, I really did. I mean, he was the guy you had to deal with. As long as he was turning a wheel or out there, he was the guy that you had to race with.
They never become a bigger daredevil than him. And, you know, and just the things he would do. I mean, he just felt like that he was indestructible.
If there's a Rocky Marchand in the sport, like he is in boxing, he'd have to be him. He's just absolutely an Iron Man.
I want him to remember me as a guy that gave it his all, gave it his best every single lap that I ever ran, and gave him the money's worth. I gave him all I had.
In 1983, Cale added to his long list of NASCAR milestones when he won the Daytona 500 with millions of race fans riding along as Cale carried the first in-car camera with sound all the way into victory lane. Fans still talk about that thrill, as does Yarborough, who counts it as one of the greatest moments of his career. Until next time, for NASCAR Past Champions, I'm Mike Joy.